Too late. Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. Well, it's another edition of our series, Undo the Coup. My call to us all to reopen the investigation of the assassination of President Kennedy so that we can demonstrate who was really behind it and undo the coup d'etat that occurred on that occasion. To do so, I've been exploring a number of the books that have been written about it. Of course, it takes a lot of time to get through all of that material, and I'll never succeed. But what we have done is selected a few that Marcia and I think are pretty interesting and important. I began into this with Patriotism Unhinged by James Manning, and that led to Marcia reading it. And now the book referred to in there, Regicide by Gregory Douglas, is our subject today. So I'm very, very happy that Marcia's agreed to join me today as we introduce this book, Regicide, the official JFK assassination by Gregory Douglas. And hello again, I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and I'm so excited to have my wife, Marcia Keeth, join me for this special edition of Undo the Coup. Marcia, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Well, I am so glad that you've taken an interest, and a very serious interest, in the
Absolutely.
subject of this series, Undo the Coup.
Yes, yes.
And so as we work our way through the material that we select, I think to highlight this particular book it's got to be a public service because, first of all, it appears to be written by a man who calls himself Gregory Douglas, about whom we know very, very little. Now, we can draw different conclusions from that. One of them is that maybe he's just one of the CIA's mighty Wurlitzer guys spinning a tale. But our reading, our analysis tells us otherwise, that he's probably scared to death to be doxxed. And because he was wise enough not to let his actual biography get into the public, that explains why his name doesn't come up much in search engines. And Marcia and I both looked around. Of course, I did purchase his book, Gestapo Chief, about Robert Mueller, the head of the Gestapo during the Second World War, and a person of very, very intense interest also at McDuff Lives. So I haven't read it yet, but it looks very interesting. Let's just leave it right there. So let's get back to Regicide by Gregory Douglas. And as I said, I first encountered it as part of Jim Manning's presentation on YouTube, in which I bought his book. Marcia then read the book, and now Marcia has also done something which I haven't done, and that is to read through Regicide, at least as far as to the appendix. So let's start with Marcia and say, Marcia, what are your general impressions of the book Regicide by Gregory Douglas?
I'm blown away by it. I am stunned that this book has gotten so little attention, that the information in this book has been completely ignored. And when I went online after reading a few chapters and had these feelings of, wow, this is amazing stuff. Why have we never heard of these allegations or information? And I went online to try to get a sense of why this book has not been better covered, and I could find very, very little. I was looking for people debunking the book. I was looking for people who have said, "Oh, this book is um, not true, and here are the reasons, and I'm gonna, prove to you that it's all false." And I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find references to the book at all. I was stunned. But as I continued reading, I think what stunned me the most was finding so much contradiction to the Warren Report. And the fact that somebody has put this information out there where it's publicly available is breathtaking. And I wanted, and I've brought it to your attention. I mean, I'll come to you and as I'm reading and say, this thing is amazing. And I've come across places because one of the documents that's contained in this book is a DIA analysis of a Soviet document that was written about the Kennedy assassination. And this DIA analysis was done in 1978, so it's 15 years later. And I don't quite understand what triggered it. That's a little unclear to me. But the DIA analysis completely contradicts the Warren Report and even uses terminology like accepted fiction in referring to some of the details, including I believe it was accepted fiction that, that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. So this has been shocking and amazing to me and has really made me want to understand where this all came from. Is it true? Who is this guy? And how is it that this has been ignored? Though he does address that in the book as well. He talks about the fact that sometimes debunking something only serves to bring it into the public attention, and the better course of action is to ignore it. So he predicted that the book would be ignored for that reason, because they certainly don't want it out there.
And as I understand from Manning, the book was actually bought up by the CIA upon publication. And so very few copies were available for many, many years. And it's only now that we can get it on Kindle. Although I have not bought a hard copy of it. I think it's pretty expensive. So
it is. The hard copy is very expensive, and there is not a paperback copy. And there is reference in this Kindle edition that I have to having hand transcribed the book from the hard copy. So it sounds to me that when the CIA bought it up and made it not available, I'm so sorry, that somebody took the hard copy, retyped it, and republished it under a different publisher. And the publisher, I only yesterday started doing a little bit of research about this publisher and came across a publisher/bookstore in Britain by this name that has since closed. So I'm not really clear if this is the right publisher or not. But yeah, it sounds like because of the circumstances, somebody had to get it back out there and self-published on Amazon, I guess.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, right? So let's get into the content of the book. I would like to make a note that I looked for that DIA memorandum from other sources, as you would like to corroborate that the account that this is a real DIA memorandum.
Exactly.
And you can't really. I tried Grok and I tried Chat GPT, and both of them said that look on archive. So I looked on archive, and it's there on archive. but it's also on Kindle, so it's easier for us to read it there. But what's interesting is it has not been officially published by the DIA. So I filed a FOIA yesterday to the Pentagon, specifically asking for the DIA memorandum from 1978, and with further descriptors on it to make sure they knew what I was talking about. So that's going to be interesting to see what kind of response we get. But as I said before, I find this material so interesting and such a well put together narrative that I feel like we should share it and we should talk about it here at McDuff Lives. So where should we start, Marcia?
Well, did you want to start with the introduction?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
And we think we can show this on the screen. We've been practicing, and let's see if it comes there. All right. Okay. Now.
All right.
Okay. I am still trying to maximize my screen, and it's not letting me. So sorry for just a moment. Well, we're going to go with what we have here. Introduction. 39 years after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the truth finally comes to light. In 1996, Robert Trumbull Crowley, former head of clandestine operations of the CIA, gave documents of his own top secret operations to his friend, historian Gregory Douglas. After Robert Crowley died in late 2000, Gregory Douglas now began publishing important sections of the Crowley Papers. This is the first of a series of shocking revelations of the secret plots of top officials of the U.S. government. Operation Zipper was the code name for the forced removal of John F. Kennedy, President of the United States of America. This operation was implemented with the help, approval, and/or knowledge of the FBI, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the U.S. Army, and the Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson under the aegis of the CIA. Backed up with documents reproduced in the book, Douglas proves which individuals plotted to kill John F. Kennedy, why they thought this assassination was justified, how it was done, who else was involved, and how the cover-up of this major clandestine operation was mounted. However, one may respond to the horrific contents of this book. One has to be impressed. No, however one may respond to the impressive contents of this book, one has to be impressed by its internal coherence, and it also brings some welcome clarity to the prolix and entangled drama of the JFK assassination. It should trigger a fresh congressional inquiry into this national tragedy. Signed, Frederick J. Norris, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Naval Attaché, retired. Now, shall we go ahead with it forward?
I think so, yeah.
Forward. The assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy in Dallas, Texas on November 22, 1963 continues to generate an enormous amount of popular controversy, more so than any other historical happening in recorded memory. The killing took place in a major American city in full view of hundreds of people and in broad daylight. Yet, years after the event, a dispassionate overview of the incident is impossible to achieve. The act and its consequences are as cluttered as the dense Indian jungle that so thoroughly hides the gaudy tiger from the sight of its prey. I'm
Nice
sorry.
metaphor.
Rudyard Kipling just pops into my mind.
Yes.
Let's not go there. Go back to sleep, Kipling. The initial stunned confusion in Dallas has continued with much official connivance into succeeding decades, with an immense proliferation of books, magazine articles, motion picture productions, and television dramas, which are equally divided between assaults on previous productions and the presentation of even more confusion, theory, and supposition. One camp consists entirely of what can best be termed the, quote, official version, and in the other camp are the revisionist versions. There is only one of the former and a multitude of the others. There is no question in the minds of anyone that John F. Kennedy was shot dead in Dallas, Texas in November of 1963. The real issue is who shot him and why. Is the report of the official Warren Commission correct? Was the president killed by a disaffected man who acted entirely alone? Was his subsequent murder perpetrated by another disaffected man who also acted entirely alone? Are the legions of revisionists correct? Was the Kennedy assassination the result of a plot? And if there was a plot, who were the plotters and what were their motives? The overwhelming majority of the public, who are the final arbiters of whatever may pass for historical truth, has in the intervening years come to believe less in the determined certainty of officialdom and more in the questions raised by those who cannot accept official dictums. In a very strong sense, the Kennedy assassination marked an important watershed in the relationship between the American public and its elected and appointed officials. I have to make a comment here. That's exactly
What you've been saying.
what I've been saying is that, and I think it was part 8 of this series where I said, not undoing the coup is hurting national security. It's creating national insecurity because since we don't know what happened and they won't tell us what happened, we can no longer trust the government. And if the citizens don't trust their government, then we don't have any national security.
Indeed. And that's, you know what, it's interesting that you stopped there because that's why I highlighted that passage. These highlighted things are things that I've highlighted as I have been reading. And when I read that passage, immediately I said to myself, this is what John has been saying.
Before that event, what the government said was almost universally accepted as truth. There was unquestioning and simplistic belief, and more, there was trust in the pronouncements from the Beltway and its numerous and often very slavish servants in academia and the American media. It is true, people would say, because it is printed in my newspaper and supported by important and knowledgeable savants. Oh, man.
That's what people think. And certainly that's what they thought back then.
Yeah, savants. I love that.
Yep.
And I think the current term for that is gurus.
Yeah, exactly.
That the media and academia might be influenced by, if not actually commanded by, the government rarely occurred to anyone outside of a small handful of chronic malcontents. The questions that were raised by the Warren Commission's lengthy and thoroughly disorganized report were certainly, in many cases, very important. That there were many errors in this hasty attempt to allay national anxieties is clearly evident, but in retrospect, and in view of recently disclosed evidence, there are more errors of commission than omission. The Warren Report was prepared and released to the public not to encourage questioning, but to silence it as quickly as possible. There are many cogent reasons for this development.
Desire.
Oh, for this desire?
Sorry.
That's like spell check, only read check. You know?
Read check.
For this desire for silence and acceptance, not the least of which was the urgent desire for self-preservation and the maintenance of the integrity of the governmental system. In actuality, the American currency is not backed by gold or silver holdings, but by the blind faith of the public. If the concept of unquestioning belief in governmental currency stability is questioned, Economic chaos can be the result, and this applies equally to government probity. That resonates today, does it not?
Boy, does it.
To quote from the title of the first and very important revisionist work on the Kennedy assassination, there was a great, quote, rush to judgment and a frantic desire on the part of the official establishment to completely bury not only the murdered president, but also any questions his killing might have engendered with him. Was the primary reason for this desire for closure merely a desire to placate public opinion, or were there other and far more sinister reasons for this rush to judgment? Those who question the official chronicle have been severely hampered by the fact that all the records, documents, interviews, and other evidentiary material are securely under governmental custody and control. It is beyond the belief of any reasonable person to think that an official agency would release to the public any material that would bring the official judgment into question. This is not only institutional maintenance, but also, all things in evidence now considered, a frantic effort at self-preservation. Not all documents, however, lie under government control, and there exist reports that do not only question the Warren Report's findings, but are also of such a nature as to both thoroughly discredit it and, in the final analysis, bring it to ruin. Such a historical landmine lay for years in the personal files of Robert Trumbull Crowley, once Deputy Director for Operations for the Central Intelligence Agency. Crowley, who had authored books on Soviet intelligence, died in October of 2000 after a long illness. When Crowley retired from the CIA in the 1980s, he took a significant quantity of important historical documents with him and, prior to his death, gave a number of these to various historians with whom he had occasionally cooperated. Among these documents was a lengthy paper prepared by the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, in 1978 as a commentary on Soviet intelligence evaluations of the Kennedy assassination. The Defense Intelligence Agency, a branch of the Department of Defense, specializes in the analysis of foreign military technical intelligence. This document was considered highly sensitive for reasons that shall shortly become very evident, and its distribution was limited to a handful of copies with severely restricted circulation. Crowley had a copy of this explosive document because he had personal knowledge of the factors and personalities behind the assassination and had, in fact, prior professional knowledge of the information contained in the DIA secret paper. The second and certainly even more important document is a 98 pages long paper entitled Operation Zipper, Conference Record. This document is a long list of decisions and activities of various U.S. authorities in a project with the code name Operation Zipper. The distribution of this document was restricted to 5 persons, one of them being R.T. Crowley, in whose papers a copy of it was found. This book uses the official DIA report and the Operation Zipper document as its framework. In addition to that, the author uses the notes he made during endless hours of conversation he had with R.T. Crowley in the years between 1993 and 96, and has dug deeply into the great body of literature, The Assassination of J.F. Kennedy, to flesh out what has proven to be a very ugly skeleton. In sum, it puts sinews and flesh on the bones of a monster. The loss of faith is a terrible matter, and one can say after reading these papers and with bitter truth, quote, "Who then will guard the guardians?" unquote. Who indeed? Well, I think it's us. We're the ones that have to guard the guardians.
Indeed.
All right.
I think we can skip acknowledgments.
Yeah. And I think I'll take a short break from reading because
Okay.
I just got a little dry.
Ah, that's understandable.
Pardon me. Shall we go into the obituary?
Um,
I just want to say these two documents, which are in the book
Right.
in their entirety, are in fact the bones, the framework of this book. And so it might be just as good for everybody to just get a copy of the book and read the two documents. But
right.
and as we go through the book, we'll be reading excerpts from it. So we don't know how far we'll get today, but I think to just launch right into it, probably more important than reading the obituary. What do you think?
Okay. So right. So do you want me to jump to the document?
Yeah, let's jump to the one that's called the Soviet intelligence study on page 20, I think it is. Or do you want to do the facts? Let's do the facts of the assassination.
Okay.
Okay, this is the Soviet version.
Right.
All right, just to be clear, this is a Soviet intelligence study translated and quoted by the DIA in the 1978 memo.
Indeed. Now, it's a little unclear to me exactly when the Soviet document was written, though it sounds like, and I think that Manning might have either said or suggested that the document was written very shortly after the assassination because of Oswald's association and time in the Soviet Union. And I guess they didn't know about that beforehand. And so there were a lot of theories, conspiracy theories going around right after Kennedy's assassination, that it was something that the Soviets had done. And that could have had, if the American public believed that, could have had disastrous results. So they issued this memo to discredit that, to make it clear that they were not part of the assassination. I think.
Yeah.
I think that's, what Manning said. And so why 15 years later the DIA is doing this memo is unclear to me. But it also says in the book that the original Russian language version of the report has been lost.
Mm.
And the author of Regicide says no copies exist. Well, copies might exist in Russia. Who knows? But yeah, according to him, there are no copies anywhere here. It's just the DIA translation, which is right here.
So as I said at the top of the show, it's not that I can verify, the evidence chain of this text. It is the content of the text that I think is so important. And if the content is correct, then who cares where it came from? Let's just get into the content. The facts of the assassination from the Soviet intelligence study translation. On 22nd November 1963, American President John Kennedy was shot and killed during a political motor trip through the Texas city of Dallas. The president was riding at the head of the procession in his official state car, seated in the right rear with his wife on his left side. Seated in front of him was the governor of Texas and his wife, also on his left side. The vehicle was an open car without side or top protection of any kind. There was a pilot car in front, about 100 feet, and the president's car was flanked by motorcycle outriders, located two to a side, roughly parallel with the rear wheels of the state car. The president and his party were driving at a speed of about 20 kilometers per hour through the built-up area of Dallas and greeted the many people lining the streets along his route. Security was supplied by the Secret Service, supplemented by local police. There were two Secret Service agents in the front of the car. One was driving the car. Other agents were in cars following the presidential vehicle and Dallas police on motorbikes, who were on both sides of the presidential car, but at the rear of it. There was a pilot car in front of the president's car, but it was at some distance away. The course of the journey was almost past all the occupied area. The cars then turned sharply to the right and then again to the left to go to the motorway leading to a meeting hall where the president was to speak at a dinner. It is considered very bad security for such an official drive to decrease its speed or to make unnecessary turnings or stops. Parentheses, historical note, it was just this problem that led directly to positioning the Austrian heir in front of waiting assassins at Sarajevo in 1914, close parentheses. The route was set by agents of the Secret Service and published in the Dallas newspapers before the arrival of the president and his party. After the last turning to the left, the cars passed a tall building by the right side of the street that was used as a warehouse for the storage of school books. This building was 6 stories tall and had a number of workers assigned to it. There were no official security people in this building, either on the roof or at the windows. Also, there were no security agents along the roadway on either side. All security agents were riding either in the presidential car, 2 in the front, and in the following vehicles. As the president's state car passed this building, some shots were heard. The exact source and number of these shots was never entirely determined. Some observers thought that the shots came from above and behind, while many more observers in the area stated that the shots came from the front and to the right of the car. There
was a small area.
There was a small area with a decorative building and some trees and bushes there, and many saw unidentified people in this area. Many people standing in front of this area to watch the cars stated that shots came from behind them. When the first shots were fired, the president was seen to lean forward and clutch his throat with both hands. Immediately when this happened, the Secret Service driver of the president's state car slowed down the vehicle until it was almost stopped. This was a direct breach of their training, which stated that in such events, when firing occurred, the driver of the president's car would immediately drive away as quickly as possible. At the same time as the first shot, there was a second one, this one from behind and above. This bullet struck the governor, sitting in front of the president and slightly to his right, in the right upper shoulder. The bullet went downwards into the chest cavity, breaking ribs, struck his wrist, and lodged in his left upper thigh. There were then 2 shots fired at the president's car. The first shot initiated the action, and this one appears to have hit the president in the throat. If so, it must have been fired from in front of the car, not behind it. Right at that moment, there was one other shot. The shell obviously struck the president on the upper rear of the right side of his head, throwing him back and to the left. Also at this time, blood, pieces of skull and brains could be seen flying to the left, where the motorbike police guard was struck with this material on his right side and on the right side of his motorbike. Immediately after this final shot, the driver then began to increase his speed, and the cars all went at increasing speed down under the tunnel. The fatally injured president and the seriously injured governor were very quickly taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. The president was declared as dead, and his body was removed by force to an aircraft and flown to Washington. The badly wounded governor was treated at the hospital for his wounds and survived. Within moments of the shots fired at the president, a Dallas motorcycle police officer ran into the book building and up to the second floor in the company of the manager of the establishment. Here, the policeman encountered a man later positively identified as one Lee Harvey Oswald, an employee of the book storage company. Oswald was drinking a Coca-Cola and appeared to be entirely calm and collected. Parentheses later, it was said that he had rushed down 4 flights of steps past the other employees in a few moments after allegedly shooting the president. It is noted from the records that none of the other employees on the staircase ever saw Oswald passing them. Close parentheses. The elevator, which moved freight and personnel between the floors, was halted at the 6th floor and turned off so that it could not be recalled to persons below wishing to use it. Okay, that is the first part of the Soviet report. And now the author then reproduces a similar but obviously different portion of the Warren Commission report summarized in his book. And I think most people are familiar with those conclusions, so let's skip past that.
All right, so then here's the DIA analysis of the Soviet report.
Yeah, this is what I think is so interesting. The Dallas trip had been in train since late July of 1963. Texas was considered to be a key state in the upcoming 1964 presidential elections. It was the disqualification of over 100,000 Texas votes in conjunction with the known fraudulent voting in Chicago in 1960 that gave President Kennedy and his associates a slim margin of victory. I have to make a note here. I never heard about disqualifying 100,000 votes in Texas before. This is totally new to me.
Right. And it's, and you know, and again, here it is in the DIA analysis as if it is fact. That's shocking.
The actual route of Kennedy's drive through downtown Dallas was made known to the local press on Tuesday, November 19th. The sharp right turn from Main Street onto Houston, and then the equally sharp left turn onto Elm, was the only way to get to the ramp to the Stemmons Freeway. A traffic divider on Main Street precluded the motorcade from taking the direct route from Main Street across Houston and thence right to the Stemmons Freeway exit. Just after the president's car passed the Texas Book Depository, a number of shots were fired. There were a total of 3 shots fired at the president. The first shot came from the right front, hitting him in the neck. The projectile did not exit the body. The immediate reaction by the president was to clutch his neck and say, quote, "I have been hit." He was unable to move himself into any kind of a defensive posture because he was wearing a restrictive body brace. That's interesting. You know, I'll just make a note of my own here, is that one of the theories is that he was hit with a paralyzing dart, and not a gunshot, but a paralyzing dart that made it impossible for him to move, so that the next shots would not go astray due to him moving.
But the fact that he was wearing a body brace doesn't surprise me, because he did have, and it was well known, he had back problems. And it's one of the reasons he was taking painkillers and getting all kinds of therapies, because he did have significant back problems.
Well, you know, an honest autopsy would have revealed all these answers.
Mm-hmm.
The second shot came from above and behind the presidential car, the bullet striking Texas Governor Connally in the upper right shoulder, passing through his chest and exiting sharply downward into his left thigh. The third and fatal shot was also fired at the president from the right front and from a position slightly above the car. This bullet, which was fired from a .223 weapon, struck the president above the right ear, passed through the right ear to the right rear quadrant of his head, and exited towards the left. Pieces of the president's skull and a large quantity of brain matter were blasted out and to the left of the car. Much of this matter struck a Dallas police motorcycle outrider positioned to the left rear of the presidential car.
And I want to jump in here and say, again, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, wait a minute. The Warren Commission report says there was one magic bullet.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have the DIA saying there were multiple shots and they came from different directions and they hit different people.
And, the fact that this is a DIA memo is just so fascinating to me because of my study of the first chief of the DIA, General Joseph F. Carroll, who was drafted into that position in a very similar way that my father got drafted into SACSA.
Mm-hmm.
And they obviously knew each other because they were both involved in the TDY mission described by
Doug Valentine.
By Doug Valentine. Well, let's read some more. Photographic evidence indicates that the driver, S.A. Greer, slowed down the vehicle when shots were heard, in direct contravention of standing Secret Service regulations. Reports that the initial hit on the president came from above and behind are false and misleading. Given the position of the vehicle at the time of impact and the altitude of the alleged shooter, a bullet striking the back of the president's neck would have exited sharply downward, as did the projectile fired at Governor Connolly's purportedly from the same shooter located in the same area of the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository. The projectile that killed the president was filled with mercury. I didn't know that.
There's another one.
How does the DIA know that? Again, that's kind of hard for me to think, how could somebody in 1978 in the DIA have known that that bullet was filled with mercury unless they had access to the real autopsy and not the fake one that was foisted upon us by the Warren Commission.
Indeed.
And I think it's very likely that at the time, General Carroll probably did have access to that kind of very, very deeply buried information, but who knows?
Well, given the role of the DIA, of course, I would think the DIA would have access to most confidential intelligence.
When such a projectile enters a body, the sudden decrease in velocity causes the mercury to literally explode the shell. This type of projectile is designed to practically guarantee the death of the target and is a method in extensive use by European assassination teams. The disappearance of Kennedy's brain and related post-mortem material from the U.S. National Archives was motivated by an official desire not to permit further testing, which would certainly show the presence of mercury in the brain matter. Official statements that the fatal shot was fired from above and behind are totally incorrect and intended to mislead. Such a shot would have blasted the brain and blood matter forward and not to the left rear. Also, photographic evidence indicates that after the fatal shot, the president was hurled towards his left against his wife, who was seated to his immediate left. The so-called magic bullet theory, i.e. a relatively pristine fired Western cartridge 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano projectile produced in evidence, is obviously an official attempt to justify its own thesis. This theory, that a projectile from above and behind struck the president in the upper back, swung up, exited his throat, gained altitude, and then angled downward through the body of Governor Connolly, striking home and passing through muscle mass and emerging as in an almost undamaged condition, is a complete impossibility. I have to say that that is one of the most important conclusions and obvious. I mean, again, one of the earlier we went into Dr. Cyril Weck's analysis, the
Mm-hmm.
demonstration of the magic bullet, and it's completely ridiculous. The bullet in question was obtained by firing the alleged assassination weapons into a container of water. Well, that's his DIA's statement. 3 other such projectiles were recovered in similar undamaged condition. One of these was produced for official inspection and was claimed to have been found on Governor Connolly's stretcher at Parkland Hospital. As a goodly portion of the projectile was still in the governor's body, where much of it remained until his death some years later, this piece of purported evidence should be considered as nothing more than an official plant. Wow.
Yeah.
So we're back to the magic bullet, and the other magic is that somehow this magic bullet has created a magic shield against real investigation, and something that the average American citizen is stuck with. You can hardly believe it, but you have to believe it, or else everything else you've been told is a lie. And that's where I think the psychological operation has really taken effect, is that we don't want to believe that all of this stuff was a lie, because we base our lives on believing in our institutions. So I say it's time to undo the coup.
And that's scary because people also recognize that if you don't believe in your institutions and you decide to do something about it, then it means having to get involved and participate in the fix. And that's a scary thought for a lot of people.
The author, Gregory Douglas, comments, almost all of the revisionist works on the Kennedy assassination deal with forensics. This is true. The main and only purpose for the existence of the Warren Commission was to firmly establish that a lone individual who had no accomplices had shot President Kennedy. Any evidence in existence at the time the commission sat that furthered this thesis was used. Any evidence that would refute their thesis was ignored. Oswald, the lone individual with no accomplices, had to have shot the president and Governor Connolly with a surplus Italian Army 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano rifle equipped with a cheap telescopic sight. He had to have fired from the 6th floor of a building down at a moving target and have fired 3 shots in a 5-second period of time. The Carcano was a very clumsy bolt-action rifle. The turned-down bolt handle was difficult to manipulate, and the field of vision of the scope was so small as to virtually render it useless against a moving target. Tests by numerous firearms experts were never able to duplicate either the rate of fire or the alleged accuracy of the weapon purported to have been the sniper's only weapon. A personal note here. Our good friend Andy Craig, the author of Presidential Puppetry and former president of the National Press Club, a very astute observer of these things himself, said that he had tried to fire a Mannlicher Carcano rifle at a test range and to make it the 3 shots within the time allowed. And he said that no matter how many times he tried, he couldn't do it.
Wow.
And I believe
Oh, yeah.
Andy Craig. I mean, he's, authoritative. So that's my comment. Let's see what else we got here.
Yeah, just finish up this chapter.
With the muzzle velocity of the 6.5 millimeter round tip bullet was very low. Nevertheless, if it hit a human being within a reasonable distance, it could inflict a fatal shot. The magic bullet thesis is a piece of impossible nonsense that nevertheless was eagerly accepted and promulgated by the Warren Commission, and decades after the event is still shrilly supported by those members of the media who have a vested interest in doing so. The nearly pristine bullet conveniently planted on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital could never have hit or passed into anything other than a container of water.
So that's a kind of taste of what the book does. The book shares pieces of these documents, and then the author provides some analysis of some of the content of these various documents and what they are saying. He sort of summarizes. He goes into a pretty lengthy uh, history of Lee Harvey Oswald. I learned a lot from that. One of the things that I learned that I mentioned to you was that I did not know that it was Oswald's defection to the Soviet Union that resulted in the U-2 spy plane being shot down, that Gary Powers was the pilot. But when Oswald went to Russia, he had U-2 documents that he had gotten supposedly from the ONI at the naval base where he was stationed in Japan, and was on this mission supposedly for the ONI to bring these U-2 documents to the Russians. It was somewhat convoluted. He was acting on behalf of the US military, and then he defected to Russia, and then he came back telling the Russians that he would spy for them, and telling the FBI and CIA that he was going to be a double agent. Very convoluted, but that's what this part of the book is all about. And, it's interesting stuff, but it's just background. And then he also goes into analysis of, talks about Jack Ruby and some of his background, and then goes into the official cover up. But it's, we only have about 8 minutes left. So do you want to continue, or do you want to stop here and maybe talk about it?
You know what I think I would like to do, if you can find it, is the justification, the part of Crowley's material that lists, that justifies why the army, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and particularly the Army, wanted to get rid of President Kennedy.
Ooh.
If you don't have it at hand, that's fine.
I don't remember where that would be. Gosh.
Well, let's save it for another show then.
Yeah, maybe next week.
And what I really think that folks, you can get this again. You can get it at Internet Archive for free. If you belong to Kindle or want to read it there, get it there, and let's take it all very seriously, because this narrative makes a lot more sense to me than any of the other narratives I found. The previous editions of Undo the Coup contain a number of other presentations that I've made. One from James Files, his last interview right before he died, is very, very fascinating. A number of people have indicated that they don't necessarily believe Mr. Files because he must have been in prison at the time, or perhaps other reasons. But when you listen to him explain what happened and where he was in context, it sounds exactly like what happened, what was described so far in the book, Regicide, because he would have been the guy with the 223 gun that he describes in his testimony, and that makes a lot more sense than than any other story that I've seen. So whether it was Files or somebody else that was at the grassy knoll with the 223, I think it's a Remington kind of a halfway handgun and a gun that has an extended uh, barrel, and the like the two little prongs that they set it on. You know, in other words, it's an assassination weapon, as opposed to the Mannlicher Carcano, which was notoriously inaccurate. I think, you know, we're starting to zero in on the truth, whether it was Files or somebody else in the same spot.
Well, one of the things that that is mentioned there in in the passage you read that was talking about the gun is that the weapons that were used, the real weapons, were the weapons that were commonly used by European assassins.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important because the book, and I'll find those passages as well, and maybe, you know, in the next show we can highlight that along with the justification, because what he says, just to give a little preview, is that the CIA contacted the Chicago mob to help with finding assassins. Once they had decided on this course of action to assassinate the president, they wanted to find gunmen, and they contacted the Chicago mob, who recommended the Corsican mafia. And ultimately, it was they did settle on Corsican assassins who were planted around and did all of the shooting, and then were able to escape through the rail yard where there had been no Secret Service stationed. And they were then taken to New Orleans, where David Ferry piloted a plane bringing them back to Maryland. One did not show up. One went out on his own and was never, or still at large, or was still at large for many years. The ones that were taken by David Ferry back to Maryland were never seen again, according to the book. So the book actually does get into the shooters and who the shooters were and where they came from and how they happened to be there, and the whys and all of that, which is the justification that you talked about. So I think those would be important pieces to find and to cover.
Fascinating. Well, Marcia Keeth, thank you so much again for joining me for a Undo the Coup. This is part 10. All parts are available in the archives on YouTube, on Rumble, on X, and on Facebook. So thanks for being with us, everybody. It's a very important topic indeed. And I trust you've been drafted to join me again next Monday.
Yes, I'll be here. If as long as you want me, I'm happy to participate in this discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Marcia Keeth. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. And we will see you next time. I'll see you tomorrow with another edition of McDuff and Underdown, the incredible research of David Cranmer Underdown, 11 a.m. tomorrow here at McDuff Lives.